The impact of the NHS strikes, 200,000 appointments cancelled in a single week. The walkout by junior doctors lasted 4 days, but despite anxiety and inconvenience for patients, many still support the strikers.
Yes, I've had a procedure cancelled, and because that procedure has been cancelled, I'm in increasing discomfort. But at the same time, I feel like without being able to pay doctors and nurses fairly, we won't have an NHS to treat people in the future.
Well, the total number of cancelled appointments now stands at almost 500,000 since the end of December. And still, there's no end in sight. Also tonight. After a horse died at the Grand National, its trainer blames animal rights demonstrators, but they say they're still planning more action this summer. Under investigation, the Prime Minister to face standards watchdog over his wife's investment in a childcare company.
Banau Brycheiniog.
A new name for a national park why the Brecon Beacons are no more. And a quiche fit for a king. The coronation recipe by royal appointment.
This is the ITV Evening News with Mary Nightingale.
Good evening. Nearly 200,000 operations and appointments had to be cancelled last week because of the junior doctors' strike in England. The cancellations were the biggest impact yet in the growing NHS pay row. Well, today, the Health Secretary told the House of Commons that patient safety must be prioritised. But Labour called for mediation to end the bitter disputes, with more nurses set to join the walkouts later this month. Here's our political correspondent Romilly Weeks on the painful impact.
For Jamie Hale, the confirmation of more NHS strikes has a very direct impact. He's already had one operation cancelled. He's on the waiting list for a larger one. Despite that,
I fully support the strikes, and yes, I've had a procedure cancelled, and because that procedure has been cancelled, I'm in increasing discomfort. But at the same time, I feel like without being able to pay doctors and nurses fairly, we won't have an NHS to treat people in the future.
During the most recent 4-day strike by junior doctors after Easter, 195,000 operations were cancelled. Over the last 5 months, nearly 500,000 NHS appointments have been rescheduled. Now the Royal College of Nurses has rejected their latest pay offer. They'll strike again between April the 30th and May the 2nd, and haven't ruled out coordinating those strikes with junior doctors in the future.
As time goes on, and should we be striking to Christmas if there is a further mandate for strike from our nursing staff, of course there will be an impact with doctors and nurses both being on strike. But this is in the hands of the government now to sort out, and I would suggest we need to do that very, very quickly. Let's get round the table and add more money to the table and get these strikes stopped.
NHS leaders say coordinated action would cause unprecedented difficulties.
That would be uncharted territory for the NHS. We've never experienced that, and that would require an enormous amount of planning and preparation. And I know that trust leaders would be dreading that scenario.
The Prime Minister.
It's not only the NHS the Prime Minister is still battling with. Teachers in England and Northern Ireland are also due to walk out again in April and May. Announcing a plan for more maths in schools today, Rishi Sunak insisted the government's been reasonable on strikes.
Isn't the most pressing maths problem of the moment what formula you are going to come up with for ending them? And do you acknowledge there is going to have to be more money put on the table?
Well, there has been more money put on the table, significant more money. And in fact, that was recognised by the unions, in particular by the leadership of the nurses union, the RCN, at the time that we announced the agreement. We remain committed to finding a way through these things.
He might be committed, but every new strike day increases the impact on children's education and the nation's health. And for a Prime Minister just a few weeks away from local elections, that is a significant problem.
Well, Labour in the Commons this afternoon called on the Health Secretary to swallow his pride and bring in the conciliation service ACAS to help broker a deal. But the government appears to be trying to stand firm, even in the face of the threat of that possibility of coordinated action by junior doctors and nurses and all the devastating consequences that could bring for patients and the NHS.
OK, Romney Weeks at Westminster, thank you. Now, animal rights protesters who disrupted the Grand National have told ITV News they are planning to target other major horse racing events. More than 100 members of the group called Animal Rising were arrested as they tried to access the Aintree course and attach themselves to fences and railings. They want to end what they say is the suffering of horses taking part in such events. But the trainer of Hill 16, the horse which died at the first fence of the Grand National, has blamed the protesters themselves for his death. Sandy Thompson told us his horse had been badly unsettled by delays at the start of the race. Here's our Scotland correspondent, Peter Smith.
The top of the screen here is horse Hill 16 and jockey Ryan Mania, an experienced runner with a former Grand National winner in the saddle. And just minutes later, Hill 16 fell at the first fence. Fatal injuries meant the horse had to be euthanised. Today, the man who trained Hill 16 returned for the first time to its old stables.
It's obviously a very, very sombre place today. It'll never replace, a lovely, lovely horse.
Saturday's Grand National was disrupted by a high-profile protest. A group called Animal Rising managed to break in past security and delayed the start. The animals were kept in a holding area. Sandy is in no doubt this caused distress. Hill 16, he says, had never fallen at a fence before.
Well, I'm absolutely furious about what they've done because they've used an event to further their cause and they've had no thought of the welfare of the horses.
Do you blame Animal Rising protesters for what happened?
Yes, I do. In the last 9 years, there have been an average of 1 or 2 fallers at the first and second fence, and this year there was 8. So, the statistics show that something was very different, and that was the difference.
Animal rights groups want horse racing banned and have pledged to continue disruption. Claudio Rojas was part of the Animal Rising protest. She says she feels sorry for horses dying, but does not accept responsibility.
I totally empathise with the pain and loss that he's feeling. However, we know that this isn't an isolated incident, as we know 3 horses died at the Grand National this year.
There have been 50 horses killed in accidents on UK racetracks this year. At Aintree alone, the home of the Grand National, there have been 64 horse deaths in the past 20 years. And Hill 16 was just one of 3 fatalities there this year.
You will have seen that over the last 20 years we've changed a huge amount consistently to make the race as safe as it can be. And we're flexible to doing that in future, but it is always done on a data-led, making sure that we're not making any knee-jerk reactions.
There is risk in every sport, but it is the speed and strength of horses and what they're being asked to do that causes concern for animal welfare groups. British horse racing has been forced once again to assess how much risk is too much, while protesters are also now being asked to reassess whether their actions have been more a hindrance than a help for the animals.
Well, Peter Smith's at Kelso Racecourse for us now, where thousands of people have been watching today's action. Now, Peter, this row's not going to go away, is it?
No, the next opportunity for disruption is this Saturday, the Scottish Grand National at Ayr, the next high-profile event in British horse racing calendar. We know that the animal welfare groups are committed to continuing the disruption. They say they will keep going until the sport of horse racing is banned, and from that end the British Horse Racing Association is saying they will meet any credible intelligence of disruption with a proportionate security response. Now, they are being asked to consider how can horse racing change to make it more safe. For example, the fences behind me at Kelso, we heard conversations here today from horse lovers, animal enthusiasts, horse racing watchers saying, look, can horse racing change? They're very much against the actions of the protesters and they do blame them for what happened on Saturday. But the very fact that conversations are now happening here in the sport of horse racing for the protesters, they might consider that job done.
OK, Peter Smith at Kelso, thank you. The Prime Minister has announced a review of how maths is taught in schools in England over concerns that many pupils are being left behind by a lack of learning. He said it was costing the economy dear, but schools say the numbers simply don't add up until more urgent priorities are tackled, including recruiting more teachers. As our social affairs correspondent Sarah Corker now reports.
The mean is total divided by the amount.
Maths class at Grace Academy in Solihull. The Prime Minister wants all pupils in England to study some form of the subject until 18. It's a pledge, though, that's not particularly popular with these GCSE students.
I don't see why people should be forced to do it, especially if they struggle GCSE maths.
Well, I think for me it would help because I want to go into that, but they shouldn't make kids who don't want to go into maths want to do something else with their lives.
We should learn more finance side of things, like how to get a mortgage, things like that.
And there was no detail from Rishi Sunak today on how he'd find the extra teachers needed to tackle what he calls an anti-maths mindset that's bad for the economy.
Without a solid foundation in maths, our children risk being left behind, shut out of careers they aspire to.
But with a third of teachers quitting within 5 years, head teachers warn they're facing a staffing crisis in all subjects due to low pay and excessive workloads.
Teacher recruitment is probably the hardest I've ever seen. At the moment, we have a number of vacancies out. Either the field is very, very small or none at all. We know the government figures for recruitment haven't been met.
The biggest issue with this plan is the shortage of maths teachers. There aren't even enough to meet current requirements. And unions say this plan is a gimmick to distract from the ongoing strike action and pay dispute with teachers. Further industrial action in England is set for next week after teachers rejected a pay offer of 4.3% and talks have stalled.
I say directly to Rishi Sunak and to Gillian Keegan, reopen negotiations and let's come up with a credible offer which will stop the strikes, which members will be prepared to accept.
This teacher in Leeds wants ministers to focus on the funding crisis and not the future curriculum.
We've let down a generation of children because of constant underfunding, and the crisis that's on the horizon hasn't just happened, it's over the past decade.
The ambition to improve numeracy is welcomed, but teachers say the government's miscalculated the scale of the problems facing education. Sarah Corker, ITV News.
The political activist Vladimir Kara-Murza has been sentenced to 25 years in jail in Russia for charges linked to his criticism of the war in Ukraine. Mr Kara-Murza, who has twice survived poisonings, was convicted of charges of treason and spreading false information about the Russian military and what he denounced as a show trial. The UK government has condemned the sentence. Here, a serving police officer is to appear in court charged with raping a woman whilst on duty. The allegations date back to 2009. And Sergio Caria joins me now. OK, what do we know about this?
Well, Sergeant David Stansbury has been charged with 3 counts of raping a woman in Plymouth while he was on duty in 2009. Devon and Cornwall police have been investigating these allegations since they were reported to them back in September 2020. Sergeant Stansbury served with the force between 2009 and 2011 before he moved on to Hertfordshire Police. He's currently suspended from duty. Now, this news comes after the head of Britain's biggest police force, the Metropolitan Police, vowed to clean it up after its officer, Wayne Cousins, was convicted of kidnapping, raping and murdering Sarah Everard. And another of its officers, David Carrick, was revealed to be one of the worst sex attackers in British history. Sergeant Stansbury is due to appear before magistrates in Plymouth on Wednesday.
OK, Sergio Caria, thank you. A teenager has been found guilty of murdering a 14-year-old boy in a park in Gateshead. Tomasz Oleszak collapsed after being stabbed last October. A judge took the unusual step of naming the killer, Leighton Amis, who was himself just 14 years old at the time of the murder. The judge said he wanted it to deter other young people from carrying knives. Here's our North of England correspondent, Rachel Townsend.
As Tomasz Oleszak lay dying, his killer was heard boasting to a nearby gang, "I've wetted your boy." The 14-year-old was stabbed to death in White Hills Nature Park in Gateshead in October. And this is the teenager guilty of his murder. Also 14 at the time, Leighton Amys was today named and pictured for the first time.
Thomas had his whole life ahead of him. He was a promising footballer and a popular pupil at his school. Today, Leighton Amys has been found guilty of murder, but no conviction or any length of sentence will ever bring Thomas back. We want to send an unequivocal message to anyone who chooses to carry a weapon of any kind or believes that violence is acceptable. The consequences can be devastating.
And the judge at Newcastle Crown Court reinforced that warning as he explained his decision to allow Amys to be identified. He said there is a public interest in trying to deflect young people from the carrying of knives, where when that happens, this kind of utterly tragic outcome can occur. Amys, who'll be sentenced in June, had claimed he was not looking for trouble as he walked through this park and said he was carrying a kitchen knife for reassurance. Detectives leading this investigation tonight made a plea to parents across the country to speak to their children about the tragic consequences of carrying knives. Rachel Townsend, ITV News.
Well, there is plenty more still to come. The ITV Evening News, including explosions and gunfire on the streets of Sudan, the latest on the increasingly deadly conflict there. Find out why the Prime Minister is under investigation by Parliament's standards watchdog.
Banai Brycheiniog, an old name for a new way to be.
So can you get your tongue around the new name for one of our national parks? Find out which area is getting a makeover and much more after the break. Hello and welcome back. The UK has joined calls for a ceasefire in Sudan as deadly fighting continues there between opposing government groups. A long simmering dispute between the army and a rival paramilitary faction exploded into a full-blown battle for the North African nation on Saturday. General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan is head of the SAF, Sudan's armed forces, and General Mohamed Hamdan Dagalo is leader of the RSF, the Rapid Support Forces. Now, they were originally allies and they worked together to topple the former president Omar al-Bashir in 2019. But now there are fears that their battles could lead to a full civil war. Nearly 100 people have been killed already. Chloe Keedy has more.
The unrelenting sound of gunfire is all that fills these streets. For 3 days now, Sudan's capital, Khartoum, has been a battlefield. It's too dangerous for people to go out, so terrified residents watch helplessly from windows, trapped inside their own homes. They're caught in the middle of a bloody fight between the Sudanese army and a rival paramilitary group. As fighter jets whiz overhead, below ground, students sleep inside a university building for shelter. Everywhere, people are just trying to survive.
It is the second day here in Khartoum and we do not have water here in Khartoum. We are also afraid of running short of our food supplies here in Kober because all markets are closed.
It's unfolding humanitarian crisis and a bigger crisis is looming.
Naba is a journalist living in Khartoum. She's staying at a friend's house because yesterday she suddenly found her own home surrounded by soldiers shooting at each other. Is it safe where you are now?
Nobody feels safe right now. Right now I am hearing gunfire and bombings and explosions. I can see aircrafts everywhere and any scenario can happen anytime and anybody can be a victim at any moment.
The fighting started on Saturday morning, but it's the result of long-running tensions between rival military groups over how Sudan should transition to civilian rule. Today, the leader of the United Nations joined international calls for the violence to stop.
I strongly condemn the outbreak of fighting that is taking place in Sudan and appeal to the leaders of the Sudanese armed forces and the rapid support forces to immediately cease hostilities, restore calm, and begin a dialogue to resolve the crisis.
Both sides are claiming key victories, and to have the upper hand in this struggle, the losers are those who are caught in the middle, who can do nothing but hope for the fighting to stop. Chloe Keedy, ITV News.
Protests have broken out in the US after a teenage boy was shot in the head when he accidentally went to the wrong house to collect his younger brothers. Police have said 16-year-old Ralph Yarl was 1 block away from the address where his siblings were waiting when he was shot by an unidentified man. A GoFundMe page to support the teen, who is still in hospital, has surpassed $1 million. Elsewhere, a teenage football star celebrating his sister's 16th birthday was among 4 people killed during a mass shooting at an Alabama dance studio on Saturday. Phil Dowdle was killed at the birthday party in Dadeville. A total of 28 people were injured in the shooting. Here, the Prime Minister is being investigated by the Standards Watchdog for potentially failing to declare his wife's business interests in the proper way. The inquiry will look at whether Mr Sunak failed to declare his wife's shares in a childcare company, which may benefit from a policy announced in the recent budget. Well, Downing Street says all interests have been declared transparently. Our political reporter Shihab Khan has more.
Once again, the finances and business interests of the Prime Minister and his billionaire wife are under the spotlight. Parliament's Standards Watchdog has launched an investigation into whether Rishi Sunak failed to properly declare shares his wife owns in a childcare company.
You're for as well, are you? Gosh.
It matters because in last month's budget, one of the Chancellor's flagship policies was directly targeted at the sector. And in a parliamentary committee, the Prime Minister was asked if everything was in order.
Nothing the Prime Minister wishes to declare in respect of that?
No, I mean, all my disclosures are declared in the normal way.
The MP's Code of Conduct states that members must always be open and frank when declaring interests. Rishi Sunak followed up the questioning that he received with a letter to the chair of the committee earlier this month about his wife's shareholdings. He said, "I would like to clarify for the parliamentary record that this interest has rightly been declared to the Cabinet Office. The latest list of ministerial interests will be published shortly by the independent adviser, Sir Laurie Magnus." Number 10 sources say the declaration may appear on that list, but if it doesn't, it's because the independent adviser has decided it's not in the public interest. But opposition parties in Westminster say this is just more of the same.
Here we are again, at the start of another parliamentary session, yet more accusations, yet more investigations. It's exhausting keeping up with the number of investigations against current and former ministers in this government, and that's not good enough. The public deserves better. The public deserves a government that's focused on them.
Number 10 say they're happy to assist with the investigation to clarify that this has been transparently declared, but ultimately it will be up to the Standards Commissioner to decide if that is accurate or not. Shihab Khan, ITV News, Westminster.
One of Wales's most famous and beautiful national parks has been given a new title. Formerly known as the Brecon Beacons, the stunning mountain range will now revert to its old Welsh name. Park leaders say the time is right for the change, and they've enlisted a Welsh star with a serious message to explain why. Here's our Wales reporter, Rhys Williams.
Banau Brycheiniog, an old name for a new way to be. A name from our past to take us into our future.
It's far from being new, but it is a change, and the National Park have recruited actor Michael Sheen to spread the word. The name Brecon Beacons is thought to be an 18th century creation, an attempt to anglicise the Welsh name Brycheiniog, which is a reference to the peaks of the 5th century lands of King Brychan.
Well, I think it's all part of our local distinctiveness, isn't it? We are in Wales. We're in a Welsh-speaking part of Wales, especially in the west of the National Park. And so it's fully appropriate that we should be Banau Brycheiniog.
Os ydych chi'n siarad Cymraeg wrth gwrs, Banau Brycheiniog a mae wastad wedi bod, ond dyma hi nawr yn enw swyddogol y parc. Mae'n hen bryd meddai swyddogion y Banau i ail-afel yn yr hen enw ar gyfer yr ardal, ond nid nhw yw'r cynta i wneud hynny. Last November, what was the Snowdonia National Park Authority voted to use only the Welsh names for Snowdon, Yr Wyddfa, and Snowdonia, which is Eryri, while the Welsh Football Association is considering changing the official name of its national teams to Cymru. Banau Brycheiniog's wider 5-year plan also includes a goal of improving the terrible quality of the River Usk, reversing the decline in wildlife species and planting 1 million trees.
Over the next few years, people will continue to see us restoring nature. They'll see us using our brand, hopefully, to pull in some new partnerships to really make a difference in local areas. We really hope that people will use the change of name as an access into Welsh language and culture, which is another thing that we'd really like to promote.
Pen y Fan, Corn Du, Fan y Big. These are names of mountains within the park already familiar to many. Now, there's a new name to learn. Rhys Williams, ITV News, Banau Brycheiniog.
You are watching the ITV Evening News. Here's what's still ahead. 25 years on, the American president who helped broker the Good Friday Agreement is back in Belfast. Fancy a slice? Find out what's so special about this coronation quiche. Out with a bang on Broadway. Why, it is the final curtain call for its longest running show.
And it's been the warmest day of the year so far. I'll tell you what part of the UK was the hottest in around 15 minutes.
But before all that, the new scheme hoping to reduce the staggering scale of deaths caused by America's opioid epidemic. Last year, there was an average of 290 deaths every day of people overdosing on powerful pain-relieving drugs such as fentanyl. Well, such is the scale of the problem, authorities there have authorised wider availability of a life-saving drug called naloxone. It can prevent fatal overdoses, but it's not free, and there are still many other obstacles stopping the shocking loss of human life. A special report from our US correspondent Dan Rivers begins with some distressing scenes.
What did he take?
It is the critical weapon.
Right, let me get my gloves on and I'm gonna get him with Narcan, okay?
In the war against America's opioid drug epidemic. This paramedic is unwrapping a nasal spray called Narcan.
All right, can you help me set this up, please?
It has almost miraculous properties to bring back overdose victims from the brink of death.
We got a pulse. We do? Okay.
Now this vital treatment is being made available over the counter.
So can you sit up for me, sweetie? All right, look, hey, stay right there.
As the United States seeks to battle the devastating toll of fentanyl.
He's awake, he's sitting up.
A synthetic drug many times stronger than heroin. In a car park in central Washington, D.C., almost within sight of Capitol Hill, we find fentanyl addicts who know Narcan can be a lifesaver.
It saved my life, but I've saved a lot of lives with Narcan.
Have you?
I've said on this street, one day I saved 5 people, and walking from that street to this street, 5 people within a matter of an hour. It was a bad batch of
It's an absolute lifesaver.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like many here, Sandy is a fentanyl addict, involved in a daily struggle to fund her habit.
I used to do 8 grams a day of fentanyl, but I've gotten myself down to where now I get a bag, a dime bag, and I can stretch it throughout the day.
How much does that cost?
It's $10.
Okay.
But I was spending about $500 a day on it. But I had to get myself down to it because I was doing so much of it. It was ridiculous.
How were you affording that $500 a day?
Prostitution.
Really?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Do you think you can beat it?
No.
Monique is homeless and addicted to fentanyl.
Right there.
So this is where you're sleeping these days?
Most times. And
over there up underneath the Sterling Pharmacy sign up under there.
Are you worried about your safety?
A lot. I mean, I've been out here 20 years. I mean, it's getting worse.
She has first-hand experience of being saved by Narcan.
I did some fentanyl and went out over there in the alley, and they gave me the Narcan, and they brought me back, and then they had to call the EMTs to give me the second shot because I guess I ingested too much.
So these are excess deaths. That's the impact of Narcan. That little sliver right there, Narcan saves.
Across the car park is Dr. Edwin Chapman's medical practice. He shows me statistics showing how Narcan has helped, but warns cost will be critical.
It's going to make it better for people who have money. Narcan needs to be free. I mean, you shouldn't have to pay for it because that's going to be a barrier. Yeah, so how many times a day are you using?
Most of his fentanyl-addicted patients spend every dollar they have on the next hit, and it shows. Dennis is only just remaining conscious.
You've been using it a while?
Yeah, quick while. What can I say? I mean, a whole lot of years.
Have you seen people overdose on it?
Yeah.
You lost friends from it?
Yes.
You administer it within 2 to 3 minutes, sometime instantly. They will revive, and you have saved that person's life.
Church leader George Kerr has helped get Narcan out on the streets of Washington, D.C.
You have the
distributed since 2016.
Lay them on their side, spray it, wait 2 to 3 minutes, and if they're not responsive, then you add it again.
Now no prescription is needed. It's hoped more will reach those who need it. Narcan saved the life of Josh Symes twice. But when he overdosed a third time alone, there was no one to give it to him, and he died in Washington, D.C. His parents and girlfriend know from bitter experience, fentanyl can claim anyone.
For me, it's something I never thought I would have to do at 31. I didn't think I would have to lose a partner. That's something that you don't ever prepare for. Fentanyl might be the worst thing in the world.
Josh's mother had a few more precious months with her son, thanks to Narcan.
It is an amazing tool. I think everyone should walk around with Narcan because you never know when you're going to see somebody who needs help or know someone that needs help. It was a lifesaver for Josh several times. We had him longer because of it, and I'm eternally grateful for that.
Josh died on his 31st birthday, one of 1,500 opioid victims in the United States each week.
No. Hey.
It's a toll which wider access to Narcan might help to reverse. Dan Rivers, ITV News, Washington.
Now let's get an update on what's making the news tonight. It's been revealed that nearly 200,000 hospital appointments had to be cancelled because of the junior doctor strike in England last week. Animal rights protesters who disrupted the Grand National have told ITV News they're planning to target other events. It comes as the trainer of a horse which died in the race blamed the protesters for his death. And the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak is being investigated by Parliament's standards watchdog over a possible failure to declare an interest related to one of his wife's business interests. The former US President Bill Clinton has described how reaching the Good Friday Agreement was a leap of faith, marking the 25th anniversary of the historic peace deal in Belfast. He also said those behind it had to wing it and make the most of it up as they went along. But thoughts also turned from the past to the present political troubles, with calls to end the Stormont deadlock. From Belfast, here's our political correspondent, Carl Dinnan.
Bill Clinton has a special place in Northern Ireland's history. The first US president to visit, he appointed George Mitchell to chair the talks that led to the Good Friday Agreement. Although 25 years ago, not everyone thought his involvement wise.
And they told me, they said, you have no idea how hard this is going to be for you to keep this commitment. People will think you're insane. The State Department had operated for decades under a theory that our relationship with the UK was so important, we couldn't mess it up.
But he did get involved, even shaking hands with Gerry Adams when few political leaders would. When they shook hands again today, hardly anyone noticed. The early negotiations, Mitchell told this conference, were hard.
Delegates from 10 political parties hurled insults back and forth, shouted at and insulted each other, and some regularly and loudly stormed out in protest. I learned that the dramatic walkout is a major feature of political life in Northern Ireland.
If that was a subtle dig at the DUP still refusing to return to government, then Tony Blair was more direct.
The only thing I would say to today's leaders is, I think when you stand back and you reflect, you know in your heart of hearts what the right thing to do is. And you should just get on and do it.
The former Irish Prime Minister believes it's time to change how the agreement works. The institutions set up by the Good Friday Agreement are such that they can be held hostage, if you like, by one side or the other, and both have done it, not taking part. Does that have to change?
Yeah. They must know that, listen, the only time the institution shall fall down is if there's an election, if the period of office has come, or a government hasn't got a majority. But not because, you know, I got out of the wrong side of the bed this morning and I don't like you, so I'm getting out of here. You can't have that in a democracy.
A bust was unveiled in honour of George Mitchell here today, but there may not be many more gatherings quite like this one. At nearly 90 and in poor health, Senator Mitchell has all but retired from public life. Carl Dinnan, ITV News, Belfast.
Millions of people are eligible for the spring COVID booster from today. Those eligible include the over 75s and anyone aged 5 and over who has a weakened immune system. Vaccinations are taking place across 3,000 sites in England until the end of June. And anybody not registered to vote in next month's local elections in England has until midnight tonight to apply. More than 8,000 council seats are up for grabs on the 4th of May. Now, get your flan tins and short crust pastries ready. It's a tongue twister, isn't it? Because the King and Queen Consort have unveiled their coronation quiche. The savoury tart will be served at big lunches celebrating next month's event. Rather fairly on the royal recipe, they hope will be to everyone's taste.
Deep in the royal kitchens, they've been perfecting the recipe for a quiche fit for a new king and queen. A crisp, light pastry case, filled with the delicate flavours of spinach, broad beans and fresh tarragon. But at Buckingham Palace, it seems it might not tickle all modern taste buds.
What is, for example, for the vegans or for, I don't know, gluten-free, lactose-free, are there more options?
I ain't gonna lie to you, that sounds disgusting. I wouldn't eat that.
I'm not sure what the relation is between that and the coronation, but sounds very nice.
I'm fine with the spinach, but I'll pass on the broad beans.
I think the coronation one was better, the Queen's one.
There is a long tradition of food designed to celebrate royal occasions. Poulet Reine Elizabeth, coronation chicken to us commoners, was invented for Queen Elizabeth II's coronation, while platinum pudding was picked to mark her 70th anniversary. And former royal head chef Darren McGrady says quiche is an obvious choice for King Charles.
I remember him coming into Balmoral Castle where he'd been fly fishing in the River Dee, holding salmon, and I would make salmon quiche to go up to the royal table. So quiche has always been popular, and I think one of his favourites.
But how tricky is a quiche? They're notoriously difficult, aren't they?
The secret to a good quiche is making sure that the pastry is cooked on the bottom. We don't want a soggy bottom. Somebody said that somewhere.
The royal chefs have revealed their secrets to palace perfect pastry in this handy how-to guide, helping everyone to a slice of the action on Coronation Day. Martha Fairley, ITV News.
And if you would like to make the coronation quiche, you can find the recipe on our website, itv.com/news. After 35 years and almost 14,000 shows, the final curtain has come down on The Phantom of the Opera on Broadway. The Andrew Lloyd Webber musical has been a fixture there since 1988, its longest-running show. But last night was the final act. Lord Lloyd Webber himself was there and he paid tribute to his late son on stage. Natalia Joquera on the cheers and some tears.
A final curtain call for Broadway's longest-running musical. After more than 35 years and almost 40,000 performances, Phantom of the Opera is closing in New York. To rapturous standing ovations, the cast and crew took their final bows on stage last night. And from the show's creator, Andrew Lloyd Webber, a touching tribute to his beloved son.
I would like to start, because I haven't really prepared anything, and I hope you won't mind if I dedicate this performance to my son.
Last month, Nick Lloyd Webber died from gastric cancer at the age of 43. His father said he grew up listening to the Phantom of the Opera score as he composed it. The Phantom of the Opera tells the story of a composer who haunts the Paris Opera House and falls in love with a young soprano, Christine. It debuted in London in 1986, with Sarah Brightman taking a leading role.
It's always lovely to be involved with something from inception and to see how it pans out, and especially working with the producer who worked a lot of the pieces around what my voice did, and so it's very, very personal to me.
While the show weathered recessions and audience shifts, ticket sales never recovered after COVID lockdowns. But it went out with a bang. It was the highest grossing Broadway show for the past 12 weeks. And despite ending with confetti bursting from its famous chandelier, Andrew Lloyd Webber hinted that it may one day return to a New York stage. Natalia Joquera, ITV News.
Well, coming up before Emmerdale, a wish come true for a World War II veteran.
The warmer weather is here finally, but will it last a week? Find out in a few minutes.
Plus, find out what surprise visitor startled this sunbather in his own backyard. We will reveal all after this short break. Join us then. Hello again, welcome back. Now, it is not perhaps the usual sort of guest we would invite round for a garden party. So it's not surprising that David Oppenheimer, you can see him there, from North Carolina, said his eyeballs got a stretch. I bet they did when a black bear crept up beside him while he was sunbathing in his backyard. A doorbell camera captured the moment when the two made eye contact. See it? Boy, before the bear runs off a few seconds later. I'm surprised David Oppenheimer didn't run off, frankly. But anyway, now today was officially the UK's warmest day of the year so far, with a temperature of 20.2 Celsius recorded in the Scottish Highlands. Alex is here with all the weather. Is it too good to last?
I'm not sure it's going to last the whole week, but this week, on the whole, isn't looking too bad. There are signs of something a little bit cooler as we get towards the end of this week into the weekend. But let's take a look at the situation for today. And actually, it is our warmest day of the year so far, as Mary hinted. But our top temperature was 21.2 degrees Celsius. It's been rising, and that was in Kinlochio in Scotland earlier today. And it's the latest in the year that it's taken us this long to get to 20 degrees at least. The last time it took this long was in 2016. So let's take a look at why it's all been pretty warm and very spring-like today. If we take a look at our air mass and jet stream chart, you'll notice that I'm sure we can show it to you in just a second, but we do have an air mass chart which basically shows the warm air over the UK. Here it is. And that's basically going to get a little bit pushed out as we get towards the end of this week. However, tomorrow we've still got the warmer air mass over us, so things aren't looking too bad at all. And there's a fair bit of high pressure around. Let's take a look right now.
Today we'll see warmer temperatures moving in from the east, especially around tea time. Heinz no added sugar beans sponsors ITV National Weather.
Well, as we head through the course of this week, high pressure is going to be around for much of it. So a fair bit of dry weather around, but at times there will be a few showers here and there, but not a great deal to worry about. As you can see, it's more towards the end of the week, but that is quite a way off. As for this evening and overnight, well, as you can see, it's a pretty quiet one. A fair bit of, clear sky around at the moment. But as we head through the overnight period into tomorrow, you will notice that cloud cover starting to build in off the North Sea as well. Maybe a little bit of mist and fog here as well. Temperatures, as a result, with those clearer breaks, really could be quite chilly, falling into the low single figures. So quite chilly to start the day tomorrow, but you'll notice as we run through, the cloud cover begins to burn back a fair bit, and most parts start to see increasing amounts of sunshine, although down towards East Anglia and the southeast, a bit of cloud will build in as we get towards the end of the day there. But nothing really to worry about. We're expecting it to stay dry. Highs of 15 degrees in the south, but further north, much like today, it is going to be a fair bit warm, particularly out towards the western part of Scotland there, 19, 20 degrees possible as we head towards tomorrow afternoon. Similar picture as we get towards Wednesday as well. Very similar conditions, actually. As I say, a touch more cloud across the south with the sunnier skies in the north. That's your forecast.
Heinz no added sugar beans sponsors ITV National Weather.
So yes, 21.2 degrees Celsius today. Chance of 20 degrees, I think, is very likely tomorrow.
OK, so it's not too bad, but it's not going to stay quite as lovely as it was.
Exactly. Make the most of it whilst it's here.
OK. All right, Alex, thank you very much indeed. And finally tonight, the touching reunion of a World War II veteran with one of his beloved Spitfires. 97-year-old Alex Denham, who's known to his friends as Ted, worked with the famous aircraft towards the end of the war. Well, Ted is now in the early stages of dementia, and staff at his care home knew that hearing the famous Merlin engines once more might bring him some really great pleasure. Neil Connery saw the magic moment.
Spitfires symbolise Britain's defiance in the face of Nazi tyranny. And more than 8 decades on, World War II veteran Alex Denham, known as Ted, came to the Imperial War Museum, Duxford. Now 97 and living with dementia, he was determined to savour the Spitfire again. Ted signed up at 17, serving in the army as part of air dispatch. He saw service in Arnhem before going on to Malaysia. He remembers the Spitfires and the important role they played in World War II.
Oh, they're a wonderful plane. I spent a bit of time in some of them, but it goes back a few years. Great. The only word I can think of.
Ted was diagnosed with dementia 4 years ago.
It's hard to describe. Memories. But, I expect I've got a lot to thankful for.
How much have you enjoyed today, Ted?
It's been quite different. It turned out to be.
Good time?
Yes.
The care home Ted lives in helped to arrange the visit.
I literally had tears rolling down my eyes today. Yeah, seeing him in uniform and bringing back those memories for him, it's just been absolutely overwhelming. Yeah.
Memories are precious. They speak of who we are. And beneath the bright Cambridgeshire skies today, a cherished chance to remember.
Let's hope they just keep flying.
There's no shortage of humour or courage from this veteran. Neil Connery, ITV News, Duxford.
It really is an iconic sound, isn't it? This wonderful Merlin engines, reliving some precious memories for Alex Ted Denham. And that's all for now. Tom's here with news at 10, but from me and all the evening news team, bye-bye.